We all know that the right habits and mindsets can be transformational in how we live our lives. But among the sea of advice online, it can be challenging to know who to trust with these important life decisions. At The Standard, we answer those questions and introduce you to some of the most successful people in the world in their fields and the habits and the mindsets they've used to achieve their success. To learn more about our social platform, head on over to www.thestandardapp.com. And now, your host, myself, Chris Pallatroni. Welcome to another episode of The Standard. I am your host, Chris Pallatroni, and today's guest is Jourdan Travers. She is a clinical psychotherapist. She's actually the first therapist that we've had on this podcast, and she's phenomenal. This is a lady that really knows her stuff. I mean, she is deep into the academic and the science behind helping people become their best versions of themselves. She practices a lot of this stuff in her own life. She is a mother. She is a wife. She's a human being like the rest of us. And so I think you're going to find this a very fun conversation. I met Jourdan about a year and a half ago as I was first building the platform, and she was kind enough to contribute a habit or two of hers. So thank you for that, Jourdan. And in this particular episode, there is a lot of ground we cover, from daily movement to the power of affirmations. I ask her some curveball questions on AI and whether AI will ever be able to replace an actual therapist. We talk about the fundamentals to make people their best, how to get jump-started in habits, and a lot more. And so I really feel like you're going to like this. She's got a very infectious personality. She's incredibly easy to talk to. And as you will hear through this episode, she is wicked smart. So without further ado, I want to welcome Jourdan Travers. As much background as I know about you, it would be helpful for the listeners that maybe don't know you as well. Maybe you could just give like a few minute overview as to like who you are and a little bit of your background, and then we'll kick off all the really, really fun stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jourdan Travers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist. I'm a clinical director and co-founder of Awake Therapy, which is a teletherapy practice my husband and I started together because we really do believe that everyone needs to have someone to talk to, and we believe in affordable, preferably low cost therapy, trying to make it as accessible as possible for people, whether you're, a single mom living in Mississippi versus, like a Fortune 500 CEO in like Manhattan. And so we have 25 therapists on our team in different states. So that's a passion project of mine and something that I thoroughly love to do. In terms of kind of who I am, I like to take a note from, Victor Yalom. Irvin Yalom. Sorry, Victor Yalom is Irvin Yalom's son. He was a professor emeritus at Stanford, psychiatrist, and he famously said, I'm a fellow traveler. So I like to say that too, especially with patients, individuals I've met. I'm a fellow traveler on this journey of life as well. And I hope that I'm able to contribute something of value, not only to the people I work with individually, but also in our conversation today.
Yay. I love that. I actually didn't know why you guys started Awake Therapy. And is it true? I was looking at some notes, like therapy tips. Is that you as well?
Yeah. So it's so interesting. Things kind of have taken off. Okay. That was never that was never kind of like, oh, this is the goal. But I'm glad to see that, and I'm writing for Psych Today, and I collaborate with Mark on his articles on Forbes and Psych Today too. So we're just trying to get as much information out as possible because, medical journals or just academic journals in general, they're a wealth of information and resources. However, there's a cost to access, right? Yeah. And so they're expensive, and many people, laymen, it's not, it's not something that you're reading in like Cosmopolitan magazine or People or Us, right? This information, it's behind like a paywall, more or less. So we like to take a lot of the articles. We interview researchers from various universities and institutions and talk to them about their work, and we try to synthesize that and consolidate it into an article that is easy to understand for everyday people, myself included, trying to get more information out to the masses.
Yeah, I love so much what you stand for. I mean, when I think of some of the reasons why I'm building the standard, when I did all the research on mental health and at some of the things you're doing at Awake Therapy, affordability, accessibility, and stigma are really huge barriers for people, right? Stigma, I think everybody knows. We all just don't talk enough about our personal challenges, which are so important to send the signal to other people of like, yeah, we're all going through this together. We're all humans here. So whoever thinks they got their shit together, let's be honest, they're a hot wreck somewhere in their life. Not calling people out. This is the reality of it. And then just the fact that there's only so many practitioners on the planet. You know what I mean? And there's 8 billion of us, soon to be 10 billion, 11, I think is where we're going to supposedly plateau. It's a lot of human beings that are going through this journey. There is literally just not enough people out there to talk to all of us. And then, as you pointed out, the affordability piece is huge. Just a lot of people are just trying to put food on the table and gas in the car and a roof over their head. And unfortunately, they just don't have the luxury, although we could argue it, that to pay attention to their mental health and go seek the support that they may need. So anyways, all those reasons, I'm a big advocate of anything we can do to help people is really important. I was writing down, it's so interesting too, because when I do these podcasts, there's a very standard set of questions that I ask people. And we're definitely going to cover those. But there's also some new ones that I wrote down here that I'm totally going to weave into this that I think is going to be really interesting to get your perspective. So I'm going to save a couple for in a little bit, but you're going to get a couple curveballs from me today. But
I don't mind. I like the curveballs. It makes me stay on my toes.
Yeah, no, I got some for you. I'm really curious of your perspective on these as well. But before we get to that, why don't we start off with, you know so much about all the stuff we should be doing to take care of ourselves. I mean, the list is somewhat endless. But I'm curious for you, like when you think of habits that really support who you are at this stage of your life, what is the one that sort of rises above the others that supports your mental health, your well-being, your success? Like, what would you say that one is for you?
Movement for me. Movement is critical and crucial. And I think this is important too, especially, since COVID, most of us, we had to work from home. We weren't going into an office. We were in front of a screen, and we were spending a lot of time on like social media platforms, TikTok, things like that. And it became like the wild, wild west, right? You're seeing all of this different information from various sources, and people are kind of like, what do I do? And I've heard this kind of message with like healing and getting better. And it's almost as if it's this nebulous entity out in the ethos. And it's like, oh, I've just got to tap into healing without really understanding what healing is. And you already have everything that you need already inside of you to heal. And I think that's important too. Many people look or gloss past the importance of daily activity, things that are really important, like sleep. Sleep controls every function of the human body, right? Am I sleeping enough? Am I eating not just even enough, but food, like real food, right? I'm not going to sit here and label like plant-based, vegan, this, that, but just because nutritional sciences have really changed and evolved over the decades. But I think, 3 pillars that have remained constant, more or less, are more fruits and vegetables and whole grains, right? So if you can at least hit some of that, great. And movement. Like, I think the author, Chris McDougall, Born to Run, right? I remember reading that book. I loved that book. And there's an argument to be made there. He really drove home the point that we are born to run. And I don't disagree with that. And some people are like, oh, we're not born to run. Okay, maybe we're not born to run, but we are born to move. We are all born to move. And Dr. Annie Lemke, she said it best in her book, Dopamine Nation.
Yep.
And I was so excited when she wrote it, because I was like, oh, I can just reference, it's kind of like, well, a psychiatrist said this too. So it's not just, I felt validated, even though I'm not an MD, I'm not a physician. She had said, there's no medication, there's no pill, there's no prescription any physician can give you that would do what threshold 30-minute walk, right? Like that's the threshold, like do 30 minutes of continuous movement. Yes, I'm not anti-medicine, medication. That's like a totally separate topic. It saves lives and it does a world of good. But I also want to drive home the point too, like the importance of moving. And so many people are just sitting in front of a screen or at a desk or in a car, and they're not getting a lot of movement or activity in their life, and it controls so many factors of our well-being. If we're not moving enough, we're not going to sleep well. If we're not sleeping well, we're not going to feel great, physically or emotionally. It just kind of becomes this hamster wheel.
Yeah. I'm like a cat with Q-tips right now because there's so many different directions I want to go in with. You said so much right there, and there's so many. Anyways, there's a lot to unpack there. Let me just say a few things. One, it's interesting because, I'm always trying to figure out what's the least amount of information I could tell somebody that has the largest impact. Because right or wrong, I feel like the vast majority of people aren't going to read the books you even mentioned, let alone read the studies, the podcasts. Like most people literally want to just hit the easy button for whatever. And I get that. Like there's some of us that want to read hundreds and hundreds of books, and some of us just won't put the books down, and we got to start living out the advice that we're given. But there's a post that I'm going to do next week, and I was like, what are the 3 non-negotiables? Like, I'm not really here to tell you what you should do in your life. Clearly, there are some fundamental things that have very universal application to people. But the 3 non-negotiables that I could distill down from everything I've learned is sleep, movement, nutrition. Mm-hmm. There's so many other ones, but those are really like, if you can get those right, even if it's one at a time, obviously it's an ecosystem. They have profound effects on each other. They build off of one another and they creep into so many other areas. But I would say, like, if you're a beginner at habits or just trying to get on your wellness journey, like just tackle those because they have profound effects on everything else. So that's one side note right there. I'm curious for you though, what is movement running for you these days, or what is movement for you?
Yeah, so I do run. I haven't really ran in since I ran a marathon for my 35th birthday last March. Like that was my early birthday gift to myself because I had said I'm running a marathon before I hit. First it was 30, and my body just did not. After 16 miles, I trained for that distance so many times. And I tore my meniscus in 2012 training for Marine Corps Marathon. I messed up my IT band training for the Flying Pig in 2017. So, that line just kept having to shift. And I was like, you know what? So I changed it. Actually, I had to adapt. It was kind of like, all right, well, I'm not going to race this. I don't need to race it. I don't need to try and Boston qualify for this. I'm just going to run it. I'm going to do a longer training, and I'm just going to give myself permission to enjoy it and to hate it, to feel whatever I feel as it comes up. And it was a great experience. And then my body felt like I needed to do something else and something different. So am I running? Yes. Am I training for something right now currently or actively? No. But I've started doing some more strength-based training, swimming more, doing more social. I'm playing tennis more, which I played competitive tennis in my youth and in college. So I was getting back into it because my daughter's quite competitive. So in different sports. So it's nice. It's more, I like novelty and I like to mix things up too. I can't just do one thing. And also another thing for me too is if I don't have a race, if I don't have something already on my calendar, that for me, that's a level of accountability. If I don't have that accountability, I'm like, I can sleep in today. I don't need to do the run. I can do that tomorrow. Whereas if I'm training for a race, I'm like, oh no, I need to get that run in. Otherwise I'm not going to be feeling so great come race day. So no, I think it's important to, when we talk about movement, it doesn't have to be competitive. It doesn't have to be, I'm signing up for a race or this thing, but it's important. I think it's important for us to give ourselves permission to be bad at something. Yeah. So many of us close ourselves off from new opportunities, new experiences, learning something new, because we're like, but I'm not good at that, or I won't be good at that. And the truth is, no one is good at doing anything the first few times. And the more comfortable and willing you are to allow yourself to not look great or to not be great or fantastic initially, it can be quite fun. You can learn new things, really expand your breadth of experience. It's entertaining the things that can come up.
No, well said. It's interesting as you were talking about that. And I think there's a few things that you said that I think are really important. One is some people are very good with very strict regimen, same thing all the time. CrossFit, going to the gym. I'm one of those people. I just run. And I run the same routes. My wife is like, aren't you bored of running that route? And I'm like, no, I actually really enjoy it because there's very little thought that I have to put into it.
Right.
Like, I can literally zone out. I might be able to run a 9-mile route with my eyes closed. I've run it that many times. And I really enjoy that because it allows me to separate the physical and the mental, and I can sort of get into more of a productive meditation. So I like that. My wife needs the variety. She was like, if I have to walk around this block or ride my bike around this or just do F45 or whatever it is, like she will go insane. And it's very interesting because our little guy hasn't found his sport yet. And so he's trying all these things. And so when you were saying we have to learn to be kind to ourselves, whether we want to call it non-judgmental, being non-judgmental, or even self-compassion, he's trying to figure out what that is. Is it going to the CrossFit gym? Is it riding the bike? Is it going for a walk? Is it playing Frisbee? Whatever it is. And he hasn't quite found it yet. But when you said you have to allow yourself to not be good, he struggles with that. We were at the CrossFit gym and he was doing an exercise he didn't know how to do. And instantly he's like, I'm done. I'm out of here. Like, you get me out of this place. I'm not doing this. It's too hard. And it was really interesting. So he's very much like my wife in the sense that he needs that variety, but you are so right that we have to give ourselves the permission to just not be good. We're just kids. We're just playing around on some of the stuff. For you, two questions to follow up on this, like, what happens if you don't get your movement in? Like, what effect does that have on you? Maybe you always get it in, but are there times where, I think you were injured, I think when we first met, aren't you? And maybe you were still having some daily movement, but what happens, whether it's an injury or vacation or just life, but if you don't get that movement in, what effect does it have on you?
So actually, I also kind of want to piggyback off of something you had just said leading up to this question. We were talking about non-judgmentalness and self-compassion, because this is related. And I think that it's super important. When people hear self-compassion, many individuals think that it's just validating feelings. And yes, while validating an emotion is a part, and I say like a small part, it's like a sliver of a part with self-compassion. That's not what it means in its entity. A part of self-compassion is also engaging in behaviors that you might not like and that you might not want to do, but that long term are for the betterment of your physical and mental health. That's active self-compassion. And that's an important piece too. So when you ask that question about like, what am I doing? For me, I try to be as intentional and mindful of that as possible. I keep a calendar, a schedule, not only electronically, so I can see patients and who I'm talking to that day, or meetings, interviews, but I also just keep a notebook with me too for thoughts, ideas, and I try to just write it out and get an idea. So while I might not be able to get in a formal class, if I'm wanting to do like a strength-based class or yoga or something like this, I make a point then it's like, okay, well, I'll just walk. I'll get some steps in.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too. I think, the fitness industry and complex, I mean, it's billions of dollars. It's quite expensive. And I think many people feel like, okay, well, I have to pay to play. Like I need to spend XYZ number of dollars to sign up for a program or at a place or to do something and yes, I'm not poo-pooing that, building a sense of community is important. Community is important. And if you feel like that's your community, by all means, yes. But I also think too, we can incorporate movement into our daily lives as is already without having spend money on doing it, right? Maybe you can't afford running shoes right now. Okay, like, can you walk barefoot? You can, given the terrain, right? Or you walk flip-flop shoes of some sort. It's work with what you have available to you. And so what do I notice if I'm not working? Because sometimes life happens and I can't get my movement in. But I also know for myself, I'm not thinking as clearly as I would like. I can become more stressed and more taxed, and I'm not as present with myself or with others. And that's something that I've just observed for myself. When I say activity, I'm, I guess, quite active by most metrics. I work out or try to work out 6 days a week. That doesn't mean I'm, doing HIIT workouts or I'm incredible, doing something intense. I do believe your body needs rest and that there's blocks of, training blocks and things to incorporate. But some form of movement, I do 2 hours of movement, try to every day. That's my goal. I remember a girlfriend of mine in Russia, she had said, we try to get like when we're young, 3 hours of movement a day. And I remember hearing that and thinking, that's amazing. I was like, if like the fact that that's kind of a habit that you're trying to ingrain in your youth of like the importance of moving your body, I was like, that's great. Cause I'm lucky at that time. I was like, I'm lucky if I get an hour. So I try to get anywhere at the low end, an hour, upper end, 2+. If I can get more than 2 hours of movement a day, I sleep better. I'm much more enjoyable to be around. I just feel more in touch with myself. And by that same token, I also know that that might not be realistic for many people given their personal, constraints, life, work-life balance, professional demands. But any way that you can mindfully incorporate movement into your day-to-day, I think that yields quite a bit of significance, right? You really do feel the weight of that. And I also like what you said, right? The 3 kind of pillars. I'd add one more. So you said, like sleep, nutrition, movement. I'd also add relationships. You kind of like, what are your relationships like? Not only with other people, which is important. We are a social species, whether we want to admit it or not, but also the relationship we have with ourselves.
I'm just assuming you can eat with people and exercise with people. That's why I left that one out.
Right. No, I do. We do eat with people. I mean, food is kind of our human way of connecting. Absolutely.
2 things I want to mention on that. Like when you were saying it doesn't take a whole lot of money to begin your movement practice. Totally agree with you. And I honestly think like that's a really great way for people to start, because I do think there is some intimidation of, I need to go to the gym and I need all this fancy stuff. It's like, no, you don't. Like literally you just need access to like space, if anything. But on the flip side of that, one thing I've seen too is some people, and we all see this right at the beginning of the year, well, at least those in the gym industry, where a lot of people, I don't know, feel like maybe spending money is their like way of like, I don't want to say buying their fitness, but I don't know. I'm aware of people that feel like the spending of the money, buying of the gear is like the jump off to, their fitness. And it's so interesting because I know people that will just buy a lot of gear, right? Or they'll sign up for a lot of gyms and stuff. And it's, I don't know exactly like the rationale internally, if that's like their way of like making the commitment and they're trying to force the commitment to themselves, or they just feel better of like, I got a gym membership now, or now I'm going to Orange Theory. But I always like, well, just start with a walk around the block. Like, there's no need to spend thousands of dollars here and buy all this gear. And then the other thing on the, when you were talking about the compassion, I've actually got this quote on my wall and it says like self-discipline equals self-love. And so, and it's the idea that like we're talking about compassion. I totally agree with you. I don't think it's a cop out to not do the things you have to, at least in my mind, come to the conclusion of what are those things that you really feel like you need. And then I try to teach my little guy, although I think he might be too young for it. I was like, we're emotional people. Like that's like we filter so much through emotion. If you decide in the moment whether you are or aren't going to do something that you think is in your best interest, emotion in a lot of ways is going to override what you want to do in that moment. And so I think people need to learn in whatever way they do that there should be a separation of, I know these things are good for me, but I also recognize in the moment, late at night, I'm going to want to eat the sleeve of Oreos, or in the moment on a hot day, I may not want to go for a run. And that's okay to not want to do that, but you have to recognize that Eliot Kipchoge said this well. He's the world's best marathon runner. And he's like, if you listen to your emotions, you are a slave to your emotions in a lot of ways. And he's just trying to acknowledge that we're not going to always want to do the things that are in our best interest. And you have to be aware of that. And you have to be willing to look at that for what it is and say, I don't want to do it, but that doesn't mean I'm not capable of doing it. And I think a lot of people struggle with that because let's be honest, like I went for a run yesterday. It was like 90 degrees here. I don't want to go for a 13-mile run in 90 degrees. Like, that's not enjoyable. But I'm like, I said I was going to do it. This is the slot that I got. Like, hydrate well. Let's go do it. But no, it wasn't a super fun run. So anyways, those two things here. Last thing I want to ask you on your movement practice. For you, is this scheduled in your routine? Is this something that you do by yourself? Is it done at a certain time of the day? Like what's that look like more mechanically?
Yeah, so it also depends too on the season, my location. So right now I'm in New Jersey. I have a residence in New Jersey. My husband, we live on Long Beach Island. My husband was born and raised on this island. There's not a ton of I didn't grow up near an ocean, so I didn't grow up like surfing or sailing or doing those things. So that's not a part of my fitness regimen or repertoire. Not that I couldn't, I can't take lessons and things like that, but it's not something that is kind of mechanical for me where I just automatically know how to do. So it's different here when I'm at the shore. I run more, I do more yoga. I'm going to the park more with my kids and doing movement that way, like sport with my children. When I'm in Florida, we're in Florida, I'm a part of F45. I do have an F45 community there. And our community is really special because it's like a bubble within a bubble. I've been to other F45 classes. I have friends who have, and it's not the same. I mean, it very much is community. So I go to the 6:30 a.m. class Monday through Friday, like clockwork. I see, that's also like social for me. It's a way to check two boxes of, prior to F45. And I also think that's part of the reason why I was getting injured so much with running. Strength training just wasn't a part of just wasn't something that I really did. I never really felt comfortable with it. I never really had a solid introduction or foundation. So I felt really awkward. Like I didn't know what I was doing, if I was even doing it correctly, or if I was like increasing the likelihood that I could injure myself. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna ease into it. And I'll be really honest. I mean, I've had phases in my life where I've been incredibly, and I came with like no sport, in childhood. I got into sport later childhood. there was just not a lot of activity. And so I was awkward. I was like, I don't really know what I'm going to do or how to do this. So I had said, right, well, I'll just start with like 2 days a week and with running. And I did that. And then I just slowly, it's like, oh, I think I can add a day. Oh, I think I can add a day. And it was interesting. You know, people have asked me who know me personally, they're like, oh my gosh, like, how did you went through a big transformation physically, fitness wise, like, how did you do it? And honestly, it was, I just showed up.
Yeah.
As I tell them, showing up is like 80% of the battle. I can count when I was marathon training, the number of runs where I was like, oh, that was such a great run. That was amazing. I could count that on one hand. Like, totally. Seriously, there weren't more than 5. I'll tell you that much. Yeah. So it's knowing that it's being okay with saying, right, I'm just going to show up, and I'm just, whatever happens. It is what it is, but I'm going to give myself a shot. I'm just going to show up and see what I can do. And so that was my mantra, and that was, just show up. And it worked well for me, and I think it works well. I think it can work well, and I've seen it work well for other people too. I don't say this to be like prescriptive or to make people, feel bad, but I do want to talk about, I think it's important too. We can't isolate. Oftentimes we want to try and just isolate fitness or mental health or nutrition as these separate components. But the truth is, it all is related quite holistically. If I don't feel good physically, I don't feel good emotionally, and vice versa. And so when we're mindful and we're conscientious of what we're consuming and what we're doing, we typically feel our best. The more we can have that intentionality, that conscientiousness with our day-to-day life, kind of tapped into that, it really can do wonders.
Yeah. Love F45 too. I never did any strength training, and then I got into F45 probably about 4 years ago. I did it for 2 years, and then I went to a personal trainer, and I'm actually about to go back to F45 just for 2 days a week, mainly because my wife's there. And a lot of it's the group stuff. You know what I mean? I work from my home. Like, I literally, there are days if I didn't leave my house, I would not see another human being other than my wife and kids. And so, not that I'm there like rah-rahing with people, but it's just nice to see other human beings because we're a social species. They got good music there. It's really easy to work out, clearly, with the monitors and stuff. So really, definitely enjoyed that. And the last thing I'll touch on before we flip over to your mindset, I'm a big plant guy. Like, so for those that don't know me, I thought I wanted to be a landscaper. I may even do something with landscaping at one point. I've taken all the classes from soil science to plant identification. I've got hundreds of plants on my property. I'll watch any movie that has to do with landscaping and animals. And if you really start to understand that, there's a great one called The Biggest Little Farm. If you haven't seen it, it's a great.
I've heard about, actually.
It is. I've seen it 4 times. The cliff notes of the movie, it's about this couple that quit their day jobs. Mm-hmm. They bought hundreds of acres, I think a little north of LA, so in California, and they turned, we'll just call it a pile of dirt, into like a micro Garden of Eden. But they're novice gardeners. They just didn't know. Wife likes to cook, husband likes photography, and they were trying to find a sustainable way to develop this land. And really what they were, and it was just documenting their journey, but what I think so beautiful about it, and I think there's a lot of relatability back to the individual, is what they learned in their journey of developing this land is it's an ecosystem. Mm. They have a problem, whether it's a snail infestation or it's a fox or it's this or it's that. You can't just kill something. You can't just eradicate it. Like, it's all feeding off of each other. Like, if you don't leave some fruit on the trees for the birds to come, like, you run into problems. Like, so it really, like, I think for me, what it just reminded me of is like, yes, you could focus on sleep, but if that's all you focus on, you're still never going to be your best. And if all you focus on is fitness, you're still never going to be your best. And if all you focus is on yourself, like, there's all these pieces, and that can feel very overwhelming for people. But I think you said it really well with the running is just show up. Set the bar so low you trip over it. Learn how to take what may feel overwhelming and pare it down into something like, yeah, I could actually just walk around my block today. That doesn't feel overwhelming. Just start there. Do that for a month, if nothing else. If you do that showing up, I think you will inevitably get to the point of, well, maybe I could do a little bit more. Or maybe the showing up will get so commonplace that you're like, you know what, I'll have to think about that. Maybe now I can worry about eating vegetables and fruit and whole grains. And it just builds on each other over long periods of time, and you hopefully develop a lifestyle and the ecosystem kicks in. So anyways, farming, landscaping, huge applications to individual life. Go watch The Biggest Little Farm. You guys will love it. Great movie. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form, just so everybody knows. But let's flip over to mindset. Similar type question. Is there one mindset right now that really serves you well for your mental health and your well-being?
So I think it's good to touch on this too. So like affirmations, some people feel like they gain a lot from using affirmations. They feel like it really motivates them and helps them. But there's also a large portion of people in society that feel like it feels phony or unnatural, or that they just can't, it feels inauthentic. And I'm more on that latter part, right? So if I were to tell myself, oh, you're a rock star, you're a superstar, yeah, my brain would be like, hold on, that's a lie. And so it wouldn't be productive. It would just kind of go in this circle. But affirmations that do work for me are realistic statements. So statements that I have found quite helpful are, this too shall pass. Nothing lasts forever, right? That having a difficult moment doesn't define me. Making just very realistic middle ground statements, for me, are what work the best. And also, it is what it is. That is a statement that really can irk some people. And it really, acceptance in general is really a touchy subject for people. And I always drive home, acceptance doesn't mean that I like it, that I want it, that I condone it or want more of it. It's none of those things. But I'm also unable to change what I'm not willing to accept or see.
It's interesting because when you said it is what it is, I'm like, I don't like that already. I want to unravel that. Like, I can manipulate that into what I need it to be. That was my first reaction to that one.
It can really elicit just kind of this visceral response. Absolutely.
Maybe take a step back if you can. What is an affirmation for people? Like, and I know that like maybe that feels commonplace for us, but I think a lot of people, I am statements and affirmation statements, they may not fully embrace it. I think mantras can sometimes fit within that category, if you will. But what is that? What is an affirmation? What is an I am statement from your perspective?
Yeah, an I am statement typically is something that's compassionate, something that is positive or optimistic. It's used and it helps many people when they're feeling down or just a lack of motivation, whatever sad, grief, whatever the feeling or experience may be, as a way to just become present and kind of talk to themselves or say, like, I am capable or I am smart. Yeah. And those are, and you are. Every single one of us is. It's kind of like that whole Einstein statement. If you measured a fish's intelligence by their ability to climb a tree, they would think they're stupid, right? So I do firmly believe we are all smart in our own way. We all have an innate intelligence that we have adapted and use as we evolve, as we mature through life. And some people find affirmations, I am statements, positive, optimistic quotes or mantras to be beneficial and helpful in their healing and a positive tool in their toolbox. And I'm not here to poo-poo it. I think, know thyself. That's a big That's a big part of it. A big part of therapy too that often goes undiscussed is that it's about noticing. Noticing, life is cyclical. We have the same 12 months and the same 4 seasons year after year. Okay, what months and what seasons are hardest for you? What physical sensations or emotions have you reflexively reaching for a glass of wine or making that Amazon purchase or wanting to eat the bag of Oreos? That's a really big part of it too. It's just noticing.
Let me ask you this question on the noticing, because I think, at least from my personal perspective, I totally agree with you. Like 12 months, like I get it. 4 seasons. I'm a nature guy. Don't judge somebody in winter when, maybe they're better in spring. I get all that. Is there validity to the fact that it's not just on a quarterly or an annual basis, but isn't there like a broader concept of like, I guess like through the decades, like, I mean, we change over time, right? So like the way we think in the first 2 decades of our life, or even, 0 through 10 is very different than 10 through 20. It's very different than each of those. And like, I think what I've been trying to like understand for myself is like, there might be like periods in my life, like long sustained periods, like 5 to 10 years that feel very different. We're parents, right? Like, I mean, let's be honest, like those years feel very different than the years prior to my kids. So I think like I understand the quarterly, I understand the annual, I understand the repetitious component to that. I think sometimes I have a hard time wrapping my brain around like there might be prolonged periods that I feel a certain way or I'm going through a certain thing, and the reconciling of the fact that like, God, is this going on for too long? Or am I in one of those very broad seasons that may span? And so I'm just curious, like, does that make sense the way I'm saying that, or is that too woo-woo?
No, it does. And there's validity, and that's important. And I also want to say too, it's individual, right? If we looked at like Erik Erikson kind of stages of development, what we need developmentally is much different in our youth versus, middle age versus later years of life.
Yeah.
Our energy, our time, our profession, there's so many different components at play, but it's also kind of pausing and noticing that and kind of saying like, all right, well, what's really going on here? Like what's happening? And that's a conversation, and that's also some reflection too.
So
there's not a one size fits all.
So how do you do that pausing? So a few things here. Like the way you described affirmations and I am is a little bit different. It made sense to me, but when I understand affirmations, like especially as I'm talking to someone, I think it gives me a decent amount of insight as to the way they think about themselves. Like I think of like I am statements as like self-talk, and I think the language people use to describe themselves is really interesting. And I think it can give you a lot of insight if you're able to pick up on that, because in a lot of ways, I am statements are somewhat identity based, right? And to your point, when you said like, I won't go down this path with like overly ambitious I am statements, is because that's not congruent with the way that you see yourself. Thus, it would feel false. But I do think I am statements can definitely tilt in a negative direction, right? Like I can't quit smoking, or God, I'm not an athletic person, and or even just general self-talk, which I'm constantly talking to my wife about. I'm like, you can't talk to yourself like that. Like you're listening, be nice. Like, and she's like, anyway, a whole nother topic. But anyways, point being is like I do think I am statements are a reflection of your self-talk. I do think they can tilt in a negative direction. But when you say you have to be aware, like for you, like where does the awareness show up? Like, do you give yourself, I don't know, 30 minutes a week to sit down and quiet? And like where, because I think that's like foreign to people. Like, what do you mean be aware? Like, is there a set of questions I should ask myself? Like, when do I do it? How do I, like, where does that show up for you?
Yeah. And I think, when people hear the term meditation, they automatically assume I'm sitting, in full lotus, chanting, or really kind of tapped in with my mala beads. truth be told, I don't do well with sitting meditation. I've tried it before. I don't do well with it in my home, because I know that if in my home I'm sitting, I'm going to start to feel distracted. I'm going to start to think, oh, I need to do the laundry, or is dinner in the oven yet? And, or do we have enough dishes? I start kind of going through this checklist. It's important to, for me, I do it walking. I find a way to just, there's so many ways and different moves I can take this. I want to actually, this seems tangential, but I think it's relevant and it's important for people to get off their screen. It's so important to get off your screen. Dr. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, U.S. Surgeon General, right? That his two big reports, right? We're in a loneliness epidemic, absolutely. And the second one too, with the dangers of social media. It focused primarily on adolescents and adolescent females, but its application is far reaching and stretching, and it reaches into adults as well. And that is, spending all of your time in front of a screen is not connecting you to yourself or to reality or to those around you. So when I say just kind of being aware, I will go for a walk without my phone. Not that I'm being negligent or putting myself or my children at risk, of, I'm going to go out, I don't know when I'm coming back. And, if you can't find me, don't come looking. No, I'll tell my husband or my kids, I'm going to go for a walk, down the end of the street and back. I should be back in about 20 minutes. If you don't see me by this time, right, then maybe come look for me. Something's maybe happened. But I give myself time to disconnect. It's important to disconnect. And we're not meant to be to spend all of our time in front of a screen.
Yeah, no, well said. I read both of those studies, very good studies. So for anybody that likes that type of stuff, just check it out. Easy type Surgeon General, social media, they'll pop up.
I think it's so funny too, tangentially also, like when I thought of the Surgeon General before, I was always like, just the warning on the back of cigarettes, like don't smoke. But now I'm kind of like, when these reports came out, I mean, I was kind of like, I sort of feel like this is what a Surgeon General should be doing. Yeah. Like we should be like giving this information out to the masses. So I was really appreciative of this information. The fact that he is saying and sharing this, it has, I think, a little bit more weight and more significance when a Surgeon General is saying it versus just a therapist.
Yeah. And they were good reports too. I mean, if you actually look at like the PDFs and whatnot, like they did a good job of putting graphics in there and making it more interesting to read than some like dry research papers. So I thought it was well done and certainly needed. Two things I want to point on that, and it's not for everybody, but when you mention you go for the walk and this is how you bring some of the awareness, a few things I'll say is one, like I think when it comes to bringing awareness, like you got to give yourself permission to ask yourself tough questions. And I think so many people don't want to do that. Like they don't want to ask themselves, like, why am I eating my feelings? Or why am I putting myself in this situation? Or why I'm like, and like, you don't got to share it with anybody. Maybe you need to, but you don't have to. But my God, if you can't ask yourself those types of questions, like, I'm not going to say like that's the end all be all, because maybe you do need a professional to help pull that out of you. But I do always recommend, like, you've got to be willing to ask yourself. And, I think there's plenty of ways you can find good prompts for questions, at least to sort of kickstart it. But when you said daily movement as your number one habit, but then you brought it back to this, that's what I use running for. I use running for productive meditation. I can't sit alone in my house. And I found that running in nature, which I am a huge advocate of nature, so I was just waiting for the opportunity to inject this back in here. Nature does so many things for your stress levels, for your creativity, 100%. For your thought process, for your ability to not be so fixated on the future or the past and be in the moment. That I'm always an advocate of, like, look, dude, just go for a hike somewhere in nature. Like, for the love of God, like, go find a park bench, look at an ocean, a valley. Like, it doesn't even matter. Like, there's so much cool that will happen out there. And I know you're a runner, so I see some of the coolest things when I'm in nature, little badgers or foxes or who knows what it is. And it does really profound things for your mental health. And I also think it's a really good place to ask yourself some tough questions, because we are nature. We're just an extension. Like humans are no different than nature. We are all in this together. So I thought that was well said. Okay, a couple more questions. Here's my curveball question for you. It's going to feel a little bit random, but I pay a lot of attention to AI. And clearly, AI is just being shoved at us in every which way known to mankind. And so I find it so interesting. Chat GPT, you can ask it any question. In a lot of ways, it's got a lot of the answers. And I don't think it replaces the idea of a therapist or a fitness trainer or anything like that. But I am starting to see the idea of more personalized AI chatbot come into play. I don't think we're there yet, but I'm curious, I guess two-part question. One, do you see value in AI supporting your mental health and your wellness to help you sort of navigate some of this complexity? And do you ever think we'll get to a place where we have like a personalized AI therapist that, and this is why I asked this, because I never thought this up until like a week ago. I was like, dude, AI can't replace some of the accountability. And then I was listening to this podcast and it was like, there's this new AI out there that will ask you questions, and the value of it sometimes isn't even in the answer it gives you. It's in the fact that it makes you feel like somebody's listening to you, that you're being heard. And clearly, that's a really important thing that humans seek. So I'm curious, do you see value in AI to help you through this complex journey? And do you think AI can sort of serve as a substitute in certain situations for like a therapist, a counselor, or something like that?
Sure. I think that's a very valid question. Where should we? So do I think AI can serve a function in terms of with like mental health things? So I use AI, like I've used ChatGPT to say, give me like dinner ideas, kid-friendly dinner ideas, and a grocery list that won't take longer than 30 minutes, right? And ChatGPT is like, and I'm like, great. That just saved me a load of time. It told me what I need to pick up, what quantity, and told me like what I'm making for dinner. Awesome. Freed up my bandwidth. So yes, I do think there are ways that ChatGPT can be helpful and useful. I'm waiting for the time where I'll tell ChatGPT to make me a grocery list and then put that grocery order in and then have it delivered to me. When that becomes available, yeah, it's almost there. Then I'm like, okay, I'm sure it's close. I'm interested to see how that will evolve, I should say. But are there going to be some people who maybe fall in love with a ChatGPT or an AI? Sure. There's some people that maybe don't want face-to-face, like real human connection. There just are. There's all different types of people exist in the world. However, I will say, by and large, no, I don't think AI can ever replace true human connection. I think as humans, we are hardwired to seek that out, to have real connection. I mean, I think we can even look at it in terms of just texting or other apps and applications, things to try. Yeah, it might be helpful short term, getting through something in the moment, but we are a social species. We do crave face to face. And actually, I'll share with you the one question that practitioners, whether physicians, therapists, clinically and medically, one of the questions that we can ask a patient that really yields a lot of information is, how often are you speaking face to face with someone you like, someone you love, and a member of your community? And if the answer to that isn't daily, there's going to be some effects.
Yeah. I'm there with you. And where I think and look, I'm not for either, or what I'm most passionate about is how do we support people in the masses? Like that's what I'm after. And I am very much like you. I'm like, look, dude, we all need to get out of nature. We need to be, connected to animals and plants and people. And I don't think we're there today, but I don't think we are decades away from an AI chatbot that has the knowledge that's appropriate, that can tailor the experience appropriately,
Mm.
and can start to add, like, is it ChatGPT? No, I agree. I think there needs to be some visual cues, but Jourdan, I mean, we're going to be there where they're going to create like a synthesized human that looks and feels and has all your facial expressions. And it's not going to be a real person, but it's going to look and sound and feel like a real person. And I asked myself, and I do really 100% believe we're going to get there. I don't think there's any question whether we're going to get there in the next 10 years. We will be there. And then I asked myself, well, is that better than a real person? And then I go back to like, well, what is reality for a human? And I was like, synthetic reality and real reality are indistinguishable. They are the real things. Like, that's why dreams can feel so vivid for people. It's like, and so then I'm like, well, man, if it feels and looks and walks and talks like a duck, I mean, like at that point, like, so it's really interesting. I'm just so curious to see where it goes, and I think there's a lot of very positive applications to it. I think it will, in some ways, maybe democratize things for the global community. Going back to that accessibility, I think there's very value. I don't know. I'm conflicted on it a little bit. I just want to find ways to support people, and I just see it inevitably coming. So I'm like, what does everybody think about it? So
I think for me, the question I get to when it gets to that point for the person is really what led up to this for them? Like, what led up to perhaps just seeking out AI, like an AI experience, relationship, interaction versus something in the physical kind of here and now? I'm more interested from my perspective, but yes, I don't know. I'm not in tech. I think it's interesting. It's fascinating. And I think there's going to be some really broad and useful applications. I don't like to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I will share something too, something insightful. The more difficult a topic, a subject matter for a person, every human, we revert back to very simplistic forms of thinking, like either or, good, bad, right, wrong, yes, no. Life doesn't work that way. So nothing is ever going to be all good or all bad. And I'm sure there are going to be some incredible advances that really do yield positive results and has a positive impact. I don't know what those would look like or be. And there also will be, too, a cost associated with that as well. And I recognize that capitalism is not going to save democracy, isn't going to save us. We look historically, we know that. If you even look at, I mean, this is also slightly tangential. I'm a therapist, but historically, I mean, companies who existed during, authoritarian or fascist regimes, they weren't saving democracy. They were following in suit, right? Business is business. And I think it's important to remember that too. Businesses care about their bottom line. They have fiscal concerns, not that they're going to go out of their way to hurt a user. That's not their intention. But there's also costs. For every input, there's an output. So just kind of being mindful and trying to broaden perspective of what could or could not happen, I think is also equally as important.
We could have so many philosophical debates. Like, there's so much I'm holding back, but I think this actually segues nicely into my last question for you. And to just sort of like smooth that transition, I don't know, I'm really hopeful that at one point we stop measuring GDP and growth in terms of capital type nomenclature. Because at the end of the day, we could bring it back to the individual and say, what's more important, health or wealth? Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, would you rather have more money today, but you're going to die tomorrow, or less? And most people would be like, well, shit, I want to live tomorrow. Like, that's more important. And so I think it's really easy to bring it back to the individual and be like, no, health is more important. But yet, on a more macro level, country or globally, we measure like wealth in a lot of ways. And I'm like, when do we get to the place that we measure human happiness or well-being? Like, I mean, like, where are those things? Like, that's how we should really be measuring stuff. So I don't know, maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't. But last question I got for you that sort of touches on that. When you think of all of the stuff that's going on in our world, right? Like inflation and war and authoritarian government. I mean, like the list goes on and on. Like 800 million people don't even have drinking water, for the love of God. When you think of all of our challenges, if you could wave a wand and instill some habit or some mindset that all humanity would naturally take to heart, and it would nudge us in a more loving and kind direction, is there one habit or one mindset that you think would be truly beneficial for all people to have?
I think, I don't know if I'm going to answer it. Hopefully I'm able to answer it. It's more of like an indirect way about it. But one thing about humanity is that the human condition is incredibly fragile, that every person in the world will do things that they pause and might ask themselves, how could I have done that? Because when we feel a sense of desperation, we'll do desperate things when we feel a sense of desperation. And also, part of our humanity, every human is a creature of comfort. People who say that they like change are lying to you. You might like change after the fact, after it's done, but when you're in the middle, you hate it because it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, you don't know how to do it. It kind of segues nicely to when I said give yourself permission to be bad at something or to try something new or foreign, because in our attempts of staying comfortable, we avoid pain. We avoid pain at all costs, and when we do that, we often create a whole lot more of it.
Yeah.
So my kind of response to that would be to ask, what hurts? What scares you? What is that fear? What is that pain that really you have a wall against, that you're trying to protect yourself from? I think that is a really important question, and something every human can really learn or take something from when they sit with that question of, well, what hurts? What is pain to me?
It's like a certain level of self-awareness. Yeah, that's good.
So I don't know how helpful that is, but hope it's.
It's your answer. It's not my answer. I'm so curious because, like, I don't know. I'll go back very cliche. It's just like the way you change the world is you change yourself. And everybody's like, oh, I've heard that quote. But it's like, let's just be honest. Like, I can't change you, nor can I change the other 8 billion plus humans out there. But what I know is I can change myself. And from my perspective, and going back to your, change is hard. Nobody wants change. Like, that's hard. Like, I don't care what it is. Like, if you don't exercise and you're trying to exercise, that's hard. Whatever it is, it's hard. And I think when you go through the process of trying, even if you're not perfectly successful, you develop a certain level of empathy towards yourself and compassion of like, shit, being a human is just tough. Like, it just is. There's so many joyous moments of it, but it is tough. We all go through adversity. There's no way around that. Situations happen to us, even to good people. You can go through it or you can grow through it. And I think if you do the best job you can to be the best version of yourself, you develop that level of empathy. And if you are a happier, healthier human being, that radiates out. You treat your family better, your other better, your community better. It has a ripple effect. The science has proven acts of kindness ripple out quite heavily. And I can't change you, but what I can do is role model the way of how I attempt to be my best version, which just means when I show up to all those other relationships, I'm bringing my best version to those relationships. And I'm just like, oh my God, if we all could just be so selfish to take care of ourselves, what would that look like with 8 billion human beings taking care of themselves in the best way for them possible? We would have a world where there's so much empathy and kindness put out there because we all look at each other, maybe not knowing what you've gone through, but realizing like, dude, it must be hard because I know how hard my shit is. Like, your shit's going to be equally hard and maybe even a harder way. And so like, that's when I think of it. And it's like, don't get me wrong, it ain't easy to do, but when I'm like, how do we nudge humanity? I'm like, God, you get a little selfish and you realize you can't pour from an empty cup. You got to fill your cup up, whatever that means. And if you do that well, if you take care of me you take care of you for you, I'll take care of me for me. And that means we'll have a more just society and so forth. Anyways, don't go too philosophical on me. But
no, but I do think it's important just from like a psychological perspective to take that. And I want to just add something more to it because I think that's important. And I think for many people, and I think, people they want to, and so let's just kind of imagine a seesaw here, right? And people want this. And Dr. Lemke talked about in Dopamine Nation, right? People want to feel joy and euphoria and happiness and contentment all of the time, right? They want to exist in that space. But the truth is that is not reality. That is not realistic. And in our efforts and attempts to feel this joy and this high, to get that dopamine rush, it's the reverse that happens. We feel more disconnected, more anxious, more depressed. So I also think too, that's important to say, like, yeah, you are gonna have hard days. There are gonna be days that don't feel good, days where you're like, I don't want to do this. That's welcome to humanity. Right. And I think it's important to get honest about that too, because I think in many people's efforts of chasing happiness and joy and feeling that euphoria, what's happening is it's almost like they're tricking themselves. Like, I should only be feeling like this. And if I don't feel this way, then I need to cut out everything in my life, or that this is wrong or bad. And it's like, no, like, pay attention to those things. Absolutely. Pay attention to what brings you joy, the people, the places, the things. That is incredibly important, while also understanding, like, welcome to humanity. Some days are gonna suck.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. Doesn't mean that you're a bad person, a bad human, anything like that. And if things are starting to suck more and more, like every day for the past few weeks or months, right? Then it's like, okay, something's going on here, and there needs to be a conversation. There's a difference between, I have one sucky day, so many times a month, what have you, versus no, every single day feels like a suck and I don't know what to do about it. Different conversation. Absolutely. Related, but slightly different.
Yeah. As you said earlier, this too shall pass, right? So
that's right. Nothing lasts forever, even if the deadline is till death do you part.
Oh my God. Well, this is such a fun conversation. I've really enjoyed your perspective on it. And like I said, you're our first therapist. I think you bring a very unique perspective to some of these topics. If somebody wants to learn a little bit more about you, I know we mentioned some stuff in the beginning. We'll include all of that in the show notes, but where should somebody go if they want to know more about Jourdan?
Sure. So you can Google my name. It's spelled a little funny, Jourdan. And Travers. You can also Google Awake Therapy, and I am there. I have some YouTube videos. I am on social media a little bit. But yeah, you can book an initial consultation. We have free initial consults. So if somebody's interested in learning more about me or wanting to speak with me, that's a good kind of first step.
Yeah. And if you haven't checked out her Instagram, you do have quite a witty sense of humor, so definitely fun to check that out as well. But no, Jourdan, really appreciate you being on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciated it, and I hope we can do something like this again in the future. I had a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Standard. Before we go, click on the link in the show notes of this episode to learn more about today's guest. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody who you think would benefit from it as well.